I think empowering local governments,
Yeah.
that would solve a lot of challenges. What happens when you centralize so much decision making and planning is that एक फिर disparity or a gap आ जाता है कि what people require on ground and what people sitting in offices in Islamabad think the people on ground in Balochistan or in Sindh districts of खैरपुर और जोब और हरनाई और खरान चागी रिक्वायर, राइट? एक बहुत बड़ा डिस्कनेक्ट है। तो जब
Very.
तक ऑन ग्राउंड तो वो उनको जाने का शौक नहीं होता, और फिर एक सिक्योरिटी रिस्क इज व्हाट दे कोर्ट के जी, दे आर फार फ्लंग एरियाज एंड ट्रैवल का इशू है फलान ढंग का। तो ठीक है, पर यू एम्पावर लोकल गवर्नमेंट्स दे, you trust your own people to make decisions for themselves, right? Because these are the people who are at the front line of the uh, most of the disasters that are happening in the country, right? The solar revolution that happened in Pakistan, that became an international case study.
Yeah.
Do you see
It's
how much Pakistan was celebrated? Everyone was shocked, from economists to think tanks जो international, कि how did Pakistan manage this energy revolution? ये तो हमारी जो बड़ी बड़ी जो वो economies है वो नहीं कर सकी इसको। Pakistan in such a short span was able to transition, so many households transitioned to solar without any kind of government intervention. So it was like a free market, right? Mm, instead of promoting that momentum, instead of ensuring that that momentum grew, the government started to think of how we can impose taxes to you know throw a wrench and a spanner in that momentum. Okay, we require around 400, 350 to 400 billion dollars for climate resilience, for energy transition. तो and the world does owe a responsibility, because जो ग्लोबली टेम्परेचर्स राइज हो रहे हैं, तो उसमें पाकिस्तान की तो कंट्रीब्यूशन नेग्लिजिबल है। और उस टेम्परेचर राइज होने से जो पाकिस्तान के जो ग्लेशियर्स मेल्ट हो रहे हैं, दैट फीड द एंटायर कंट्री, राइट?
Hello and welcome to Front Seat to Climate Change. I'm your host, Mahin Azam Khan. The federal budget is being presented today, and while much of the attention will be on taxes, development spending, and economic growth, there's another question worth asking. Will our budget reflect the climate realities Pakistan faces? From devastating floods and record breaking heat waves to worsening air pollution and growing water stress, climate change is already shaping lives and livelihoods across the country. Pakistan frequently presents itself as one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change. But does the federal budget actually reflect that reality? More importantly, are we funding resilience or simply relabeling existing spending as climate action? Today, we'll explore what a climate budget actually means, whether Pakistan is spending on the right climate priorities, how dependent we remain on international climate finance, and what a truly climate resilient budget should look like. To help us unpack these questions, we're joined by Ahmed Kamal, Deputy Secretary, General International Climate and Energy Council. Hello, Ahmed, and thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, mine. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. So, with the federal budget, being unveiled today, does it reflect the reality that Pakistan is one of the most vulnerable countries, when it comes to climate change? What indicators should we look to assess whether the government is genuinely investing in climate resilience rather than simply, relabeling existing spending as climate action?
Well, I think, in my opinion, it really isn't doing much with regards to your question. Why? I'll outline the reasons. The number one being कि Ministry of Climate का जो budget था, it used to be around 14 billion rupees. It got a substantial cut, right? And it was reduced to around 2.78 billion. जो आपकी जो main ministry है, that's coordinating the entire debate, discourse around climate, and creating all this thing. So that represents or just 0.22% of this year's budget that has been allocated to the Ministry of Climate, right? Out of all the 1.2 trillion rupees का जो development budget है, and फिर उसके बाद जो है उन्होंने थोड़ा सा ना जेरीमैंडरिंग की है, ग्रीन वॉशिंग ऑफ सॉर्ट्स, कि जो मिटिगेशन के जो प्रोजेक्ट्स थे, एक साइड पे बोलते हैं कि पाकिस्तान प्रोड्यूसेस लेस देन 1% ऑफ emissions इन द वर्ल्ड, राइट, ग्लोबल emissions, लेकिन जो मेन जो बजट उन्होंने रखा है वो मिटिगेशन प्रोजेक्ट्स के लिए रखा है, that amounts to around 600 billion rupees. और जो अडेप्टेशन के लिए जो बजट है, that has only been allocated at 80 billion rupees so far. So there is a clear contradiction and irony in how the government has planned this year's budget. कि जो अडेप्टेशन की जो आपकी नीड है, जो आपकी एंटिसिपेटरी एक्शन की नीड है, आपने उसके लिए जो बजट है वो दैट्स जस्ट 80 बिलियन रुपीज, एंड फॉर मिटिगेशन which you always claim that you are producing less than 1% of global emissions, उसके लिए आपने इतना ज्यादा बजट रखा है। और फिर उसमें ग्रीन वॉशिंग क्या करे कि जो हाइडल पावर प्रोजेक्ट्स है या जो इलेक्ट्रिक ग्रिड की जो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर अपग्रेडेशन है, उसके अंदर जो है they've added those projects in the mitigation list as well, right? Then the third contradiction in this year's budget is कि एक तरफ जो उन्होंने फॉसिल फ्यूल पे लेवी लगाई, and they are thinking of increasing it from 2.5 rupees to 5 rupees, right? कि fossil fuel के ऊपर जो carbon levy है, that is to discourage use of fossil fuel globally, right? That's the main reason that governments apply these kinds of levies. लेकिन on top of that, in the same breath, they have applied an 80% tax on solar panels as well.
Yeah.
अभी तक लगाया नहीं है, लेकिन मार्केट में उसका इफेक्ट आने लग गया. The prices of solar panels and batteries has increased to around 10,000 rupees to 20,000 rupees per plate. इतना सिग्निफिकेंट जो उन्होंने एंटिसिपेट किया मार्केट ने इसको, तो उसकी तरफ फिर एक तरफ ये डिस्करेजिंग फॉसिल फ्यूल्स के by applying carbon levy, then you are also applying taxation on electric vehicles and solar panels as well.
Absolutely. I think the discourse and the difference between mitigation and adaptation is very obvious in the previous budgets as well. And I think this discourse has been going on for a really long time, because when we see the repercussions and when we see the effects, we know that Pakistan is a very vulnerable country and it needs to focus more on adaptation rather than mitigation measures. And this is a really important point that you spoke about right now, especially because many people will be looking at the budget numbers and will be analyzing it without necessarily actually understanding what usually qualifies as climate spending. We often also hear terms such as climate budgeting, climate finance, adaptation, and mitigation, like you mentioned as well. So what exactly do you think is a climate budget, and how does Pakistan currently define climate spending?
I think the way they describe climate spending is any kind of project that remotely they see it will bring in more international financing. Climate financing को उन्होंने बिल्कुल ही लिंक कर दिया to international donor money coming into Pakistan, either in the form of loans या grants. तो क्योंकि आपको पता है कि ODA जो assistance है of development assistance from Germany, from UK, they've reduced that the spending globally, right? So that has translated into a lot of problems for the government as well, क्योंकि उसकी वजह से they've had history as well, and as well as ongoing projects. एंड इसका फिर क्लाइमेट बजट में आप कहते हैं कि यू प्रेजेंट न्यू प्रोजेक्ट्स, लेकिन इसमें जो मौजूदा बजट है उसमें यू विल सी दैट देयर आरंट एनी substantially new projects mentioned so far. It's just the continuation of old projects wrapped in new packaging. जिस तरह बिलियन ट्री सुनामी थी उसको चेंज करके अब स्केलिंग ग्रीन पाकिस्तान के नाम से उन्होंने प्रेजेंट कर दिया. तो क्लाइमेट बजटिंग का जो है IMF फोर्स देम कि आपने जो PSDP में जितना भी प्रोजेक्ट्स होंगे यू हैव टू टैग देम कि जी इसके क्या क्लाइमेट रेजिलियंस की जो उसमें कैटेगरी में आ रहा है, मिटिगेशन की कैटेगरी में आ रहा है, क्योंकि क्लाइमेट रेजिलियंस एक ब्रॉड एक टर्म है उसमें. एंड आई हैव नोटिस्ड कि गवर्नमेंट को खुद भी क्लैरिटी नहीं कि व्हाट्स डिफरेंस बिटवीन क्लाइमेट एंड एनवायरनमेंट इवन, राइट, दीज बेसिक टर्मिनोलॉजीज में. ऑन टॉप ऑफ दैट वो क्लाइमेट रेजिलियंस का जो भी उनको लगता है कि जी हाइडल पावर प्रोजेक्ट है तो इट्स क्लीन एनर्जी, इट्स रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी, तो जो है उसको भी उन्होंने डाल दिया क्लाइमेट बजट के अंदर. जो ग्रिड अपग्रेडेशन है कि जी दिस इज रिड्यूसिंग फॉसिल फ्यूल डिपेंडेंस थ्रू बेटर लाइन, जो लाइन लॉस हैं वो रिड्यूस हो रहे हैं, तो उसको भी आप डाल देंगे क्लाइमेट के उसके मिटिगेशन के बजट में. तो दिस काइंड ऑफ थिंग्स आर क्रिएटिंग डिस्क्रिपेंसी। जो मेन प्रॉब्लम्स जो पाकिस्तान फेस कर रहा है, जिस तरह एयर पोल्यूशन हो गई, स्मॉग से रिलेटेड, लाहौर में कितने ज़्यादा लोगों की डेथ्स हुई उसकी वजह से, हीट वेव्स जो पाकिस्तान में आए, क्लाइमेट रेजिलियंट इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के ऊपर कोई गवर्नमेंट ने पैसा, कोई प्रोजेक्ट लॉन्च नहीं किया। आप देखिए कि लाहौर में ही जब वो रूडा पूरा रिवर प्लेन के ऊपर आपने पूरा एक अलग शहर जो बसाने की कोशिश की, तो फिर उसका क्या नतीजा निकला कि all that area was flooded when you create habitation in river plains। अपनी तरफ से उन्होंने गवर्नमेंट, जो प्रीवियस गवर्नमेंट थी उससे पहले, पीटीआई, और उससे पहले भी जो प्रोजेक्ट जिन्होंने ये पूरा लॉन्च किया, जो पाइपलाइन के अंदर था काफी अरसे से, तो उसका क्या रिजल्ट निकला कि वो उन्होंने देखा कि यार ये फ्री एरिया है, तो इसको ऊपर हम प्लॉट बना देना। एक हमारी नेशनल हॉबी है कि कोई भी एग्रीकल्चरल लैंड होगा उसके ऊपर आपने प्लॉट बना देना है, कोई भी आपके रिवर प्लेन की जगह आपको खाली मिलेगी उसके ऊपर हमने प्लॉट बना के आपने जो है वो बिल्डिंग्स क्रिएट कर देनी है। उससे फिर क्या हो रहा है, एक तो यू आर लूजिंग योर एग्रीकल्चरल लैंड,
Absolutely.
राइट। फूड सिक्योरिटी आपको इतना इशू है, फूड सिक्योरिटी के बजट में भी गवर्नमेंट ने जो है वो काफी जो है वो रिडक्शन की है। जीडीपी में बोलते हैं जो सबसे मेन 25% जो कंट्रीब्यूशन है वो आपकी एग्रीकल्चरल सेक्टर की है, और फूड सिक्योरिटी की आपने बजट के ऊपर काट लगाया है। तो वो क्लाइमेट बजट तो नहीं हुआ ना, वो तो फिर एक किस्म की डिस्क्रिपेंसी है, बिकॉज द थिंग्स दैट दे आर सेइंग इन their actions are not matching up।
Absolutely. And, I think that raises an interesting question as well, because allocating money and achieving results are, not always the same thing, like you mentioned as well. And like you mentioned that, governments often highlight climate related allocations, but how do we distinguish, between climate spending on paper and actual climate outcomes on the ground?
I think we will then have to look beyond what is being presented on the government spreadsheet, right? स्प्रेडशीट्स में वो नंबर्स तो शो कर देते कि जी हमने इस हेड के अंदर इतना जो वो पैसा एलोकेट कर दिया, लेकिन द मेन थिंग जो वो उस एलोकेशन में भी जो क्लाइमेट के वो लैप्स कर जाता है बजट, जितना भी वो बजट रखते हैं ना। फॉर एग्जांपल सोशल सर्विसेज की एक एग्जांपल देते हैं, बिकॉज इट्स इंटरलिंक्ड, राइट। इट्स इंटरलिंक्ड टू क्लाइमेट, टू पॉवर्टी, टू पीपल्स लाइवलीहुड, जो बीआईएसपी का फॉर एग्जांपल, राइट। तो उसका जो बजट है दैट्स अराउंड 722 बिलियन रुपीस लास्ट ईयर, BISP का, and 9.2 million families benefit from that project, 9.2 million families। लेकिन उसकी जो यूटिलाइजेशन हुई है वो दैट वाज, और जो डिसबर्समेंट ऑफ दैट फंड, उसमें 500 बिलियन रुपीस हुई है, और उस 500 बिलियन में से भी जो है तकरीबन 200 बिलियन ऑफ सॉर्ट्स जो है वो BISP के रनिंग में, जो उसकी जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन उसकी रनिंग में वो यूटिलाइज हो गया कि जी ये सैलरीज, overheads, pensions, and miscellaneous cost. But how do you justify these costs that you're allocating in the budget? On the one hand, you are placing budgets कि आपने जो एलोकेशन की ये क्लाइमेट की या किसी भी और हेड के अंदर, सोशल सर्विसेज की, एग्रीकल्चरल के उसमें, फूड सिक्योरिटी के उसमें, बिकॉज ऑल ऑफ दीज आर इंटरलिंक्ड ऑफ सॉर्ट्स, लेकिन उसकी यूटिलाइजेशन ऑन ग्राउंड हो रही है या नहीं, वो दैट आपके क्वेश्चन की उसमें है कि इट्स क्वेश्चनेबल, इट इजंट बीइंग ट्रांसलेटेड ऑन टू द ग्राउंड, एंड फॉर दैट रीजन जो पैसा वो रखते हैं वो लैप्स हो जाता है। वो उधर से बोलता है जी बढ़ाएं मजीद, लेकिन वही जो पैसा आपको एलोकेट करे उसकी यूटिलाइजेशन नहीं हो रही है, तो आई थिंक दैट आल्सो क्रिएट्स अ डिस्क्रिपेंसी विद इन इटसेल्फ।
Absolutely. I think, with the current situation that is being faced in Pakistan, we can see that there is not a lot of transparency, when it comes to climate
And just to
spending.
add to it, I जो है ना, I saw your post as well on it कि जो वो स्मॉग मशीन्स पंजाब ने खरीदी थी,
जी जी।
स्मॉग रिडक्शन के लिए जो मशीनरी खरीदी थी, तो उसकी बड़ी क्वेश्चनेबल एफिकेसी थी कि वो एक सेट तो कर दिया बड़े, जो द गवर्नमेंट स्पेंट बिलियंस ऑफ रुपीस टू बाय दिस एक्सपेंसिव मशीनरीज, बट डिड इट रियली मेक एनी डिफरेंस? वाज इट, उसकी एफिकेसी क्या है? हु मेजर्स दैट एफिकेसी? गवर्नमेंट तो शो कर दिया कि जी वी आर वर्किंग ऑन सॉल्विंग दिस प्रॉब्लम, बट डिड इट एड्रेस द रूट कॉज, राइट? फिर अर्बन प्लानिंग का एक और एग्जांपल लिंक टू व्हाट यू जस्ट, द क्वेश्चन दैट यू आस्क्ड, कि इस्लामाबाद में व्हेनेवर यू विजिट इट, तो आप देखेंगे कि पाम ट्रीज हमारे जो है अर्बन प्लानर्स को लगाने का बड़ा शौक है। आप पाम ट्रीज नेटिव टू इस्लामाबाद? आर दे मेकिंग एनी डिफरेंस इन द जो जो मेन एक ट्री का क्या होता है कि वो इट या तो कार्बन सिंक है, तो आप यू यूज दोस ट्रीज, या इट प्रोवाइड्स शेड या इट प्रोवाइड्स फूड, palm trees do not provide any kind of fruit and they do not provide any shade whatsoever. On top of that, because they're not native and suitable to Islamabad's climate, तो क्या होता है कि जो, and they are pretty expensive, mind you. एक एक दरख्त जो वो कई कई लाख रुपए का है जो palm trees का, and you see after a few months जो है वो it withers away because it's not native to Islamabad.
Absolutely. I think that there's a lot of there are a lot of questions around the transparency, like you just mentioned, when we talk about climate funding, when we talk about the allocation of resources that are being spent on the problems that we're facing, around climate change. And I think the best way to deal with this discrepancy is that there should be honest with the public, and more data should be revealed about every specific project, so that we know the numbers and we know the results of those projects as well. Let's talk a little bit about more where these investments are actually being directed, or we're told that they are being directed towards that. So since the devastating floods of 2022, the flood resilience has understandably dominated the climate conversation. And it's just not 2022. Every year, of course, we face, devastating floods. And you can see last year as an example as well. But do you think are other major risks, such as, extreme heat, water scarcity, and urban resilience, receiving the same attention and funding that they deserve?
On the question of heat waves, there was a report a few months back, uh, I think from UNDP, and they said that by 2050, 1 in 3 deaths related to heat waves will be happening in Pakistani cities. Right? Pakistani cities already break records and heat waves. Karachi ka dekh lein aap, Jacobabad, Sibbi, all of them in the summers, the temperatures hit 51, 52 degrees Celsius even in summers. And unfortunately, the government has zero focus towards that. वही मैंने आपको जिस तरह पहले बात की कि पाम ट्रीज एक जो बेसिक जो है वो जहाँ आप दरख्त लगाते हैं द टेम्परेचर्स नेचुरली ड्रॉप बाय अराउंड 10 डिग्री सेल्सियस डिपेंडिंग ऑन द वैरायटी ऑफ द ट्रीज. तो शेड वाले ट्रीज जो है वो उसकी वो बिल्कुल गवर्नमेंट के वो है ही नहीं उस तरफ. जो अर्बन प्लानर्स हैं उनके भी वो उस चीज को रियलाइज नहीं करते. आप देखिए कि when you are talking about urban planning, you are talking about livable cities, right? कि are the cities that you're building and developing, are they walkable, are they cyclable? आप जब वो अमेरिकन मॉडल आप अडॉप्ट किए जा रहे कि जी जहां भी आपने जाना है आप यू हैव टू यूज योर कार्स, राइट? You'd have to use some form of vehicle. You cannot walk to some place, right? In this heat, not everybody, and on top of that, not everybody can afford cars, right? Public transport की जो वो थोड़ी बहुत उन्होंने कोशिश की कि इलेक्ट्रिक बसेस अब वो मेट्रो हम जो है या ऑरेंज रेल जो है वो स्टार्ट करें, लेकिन उसकी लास्ट माइल कनेक्टिविटी नहीं है. तो इट जस्ट goes through major points in the city, लेकिन everybody has different needs and wants to go to different places. Last mile connectivity नहीं है तो a lot of people then have to rely on some other form of transport, right? So how are you going to manage transporting people from one spot, moving them from one spot to another in this heat, right? दूसरा जो है वाटर स्कार्सिटी. पाकिस्तान फेसेस एन इंटरेस्टिंग कनंड्रम इन द सेंस कि या तो पानी होता नहीं है, आपके पास खुश्क साली होती है, ड्रॉट होता है, या फिर ऐसा इतना पानी आता है कि आपको पूरा मुल्क डूब जाता है, राइट? You either face the situation of drought or deluge. On top of that, India is spending $23 billion to stop all the uh, water that's flowing from Pakistan's share of the Indus. अभी जो है ट्यूसडे को लास्ट इस वीक के ट्यूसडे को इंडिया के जो है वो मिनिस्टर वाटर रिसोर्सेज के उन्होंने बोला कि हमारी जो कोशिश है वो ये है कि पाकिस्तान को एक बूंद पानी भी ना मिले. कितनी
Yeah.
बड़ी स्टेटमेंट है. तो व्हाट्स द गवर्नमेंट्स रिस्पांस टू दिस एक्सेप्ट जो फॉरेन ऑफिस ने एक जो उनका कस्टमरी एक जो जवाब होता है उसके अलावा. तो आई थिंक वो दैट रिस्पांस हैजंट बीन सो फोर्थकमिंग. कोई पॉलिसी इस तरह की नहीं आई है. ऑन टॉप ऑफ दैट एक और जो सिचुएशन हुई है इसमें यह है कि गवर्नमेंट ने जो सब्सिडी दी थी सोलर ट्यूबवेल्स के लिए, राइट, कि एक तरीके से तो आप ऑन द सर्फेस यूड अप्रिशिएटेड कि जी यू मूव्ड फ्रॉम पेट्रोल फॉसिल फ्यूल के जो वो पंप्स हैं, वाटर पंप्स, यू मूव टू सोलर पंप्स, राइट, फॉर एग्रीकल्चरल यूज, कि जी ऑन द सर्फेस इट लुक्स गुड कि जी यू ट्रांजिशन फ्रॉम फॉसिल फ्यूल्स टू इलेक्ट्रिक पंप्स जो दैट रन ऑन सोलर पैनल्स। लेकिन उससे क्या हुआ कि the farmers got the incentive to run those solar tube wells non-stop. उससे उसका अनफॉर्चुनेट एंड अनसीन रिजल्ट ये हुआ कि the aquifer and ground water जो reserves थे that quickly started disappearing. That put more pressure on your scarce groundwater resources, कि उसका इतना बेतहाशा मिसयूज हुआ फार्मर्स की तरफ से कि बाकी दुनिया ड्रिप इरिगेशन की तरफ जाती है ऑन एग्रीकल्चर, एंड ड्रिप इरिगेशन एक्चुअली इंक्रीजेस एग्रीकल्चरल yields. Pakistan has some of the lowest agricultural yields, not in the not in the world but in the region as well. Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Indonesia, India have higher per hectare unki jo produce hai compared to Pakistan, because they adopted modern practices like drip irrigation, and using different kinds of mixtures of compost and fertilizer, not relying too much on synthetic chemicals and so on and so forth. तो पाकिस्तान के केस में उन्होंने बेतहाशा मिसयूज किया ग्राउंड वाटर का, और उससे क्या हो कि एक तो आपके जो वो रिड्यूस हो गई। आप देखें कॉटन, यू हैड टू इम्पोर्ट अराउंड 3 बिलियन बेल्स ऑफ कॉटन। जो अमेरिका ने एक हफ्ते में जो टोटल जो कॉटन की प्रोडक्शन हुई अमेरिका में, you had to buy that entire stock of cotton from America. From being a producer of cotton, because your biggest export is textile, you became the biggest importer of cotton within a span of few years because of wrong policies. And that goes back to the question that you asked, and that's the answer to it.
Absolutely. I think just adding a little bit to what you said, especially, when it comes to extreme heat waves. Extreme heat waves is just not only a public health issue. Right now it's becoming an economic crisis as well for Pakistan, because it's impacting the amount of hours that, workers have to work during the heat, especially whose livelihoods depend on outdoor activities. And there are many in that strata, right? In the winters, we have smog, and in the summers, we have extreme heat waves. So this is something that is, becoming a huge economic issue.
Both
And
economic issue as well as जो है वो in both these scenarios the people are dying, right?
exactly,
Smog is reducing people's lives by almost 3 to 4 years. It's like smoking 2 packs of cigarettes. जो लाहौर की जो अभी थोड़ा सा reduce हुई है एयर पोल्यूशन, लेकिन जो बीच में 2017 to 2023 तो इतनी ज्यादा सिवियर हो गई थी। इट वाज लाइक आप अगर 1 घंटे के लिए भी बाहर लाहौर की हवा में रहते थे, इट वाज लाइक यू वर स्मोकिंग 2 packs of cigarette.
absolutely, yeah. So extreme heat is not only, a public health issue, but it's also an economic issue, right? So is the growing economic cost of extreme heat waves being adequately reflected in Pakistan's budget's priorities? That will be revealed today.
I think we'll be in for a disappointment because there isn't from the documents that I saw. Probably I missed it, like because I had the chance to look at some of the budget documents, so उसमें I didn't see it. Heat से related urban planning, because urban planning and how you design cities is the only way that you can fight this challenge जो heat waves का है। अब जिस तरह यूएई में क्या होता है कि जो the workers or the laborers that are working outside, most of them are Pakistani workers, तो जो बाहर की गवर्नमेंट है उनको ज्यादा ख्याल है पाकिस्तानी लेबरर्स का, that they allow and the government enforces strict bans कि जी आपने जो extreme जो heat का period है from 1 to 3 p.m. so the workers are not allowed to work outside, and that the company and the organization that they're working for, they have to provide them with proper shade, proper equipment, and air conditioners and fans to protect them from the heat.
Like you said, we need better urban planning, and we need to focus on this issue. And there are multiple ways in which you can, tackle these problems. A lot of countries, what they do is that they make proper cooling centers for different workers in different communities. So that's something that also, Pakistan should focus on, especially if not the federal budget, let's hope that the provincial budget, mentions something of this sort. And perhaps that's where the conversation, shifts from responding to, climate impacts to, preparing for them, because we have established this that Pakistan needs adaptation policies rather than mitigation. All of the things that we were discussing, they relate pretty much to adaptation. So climate experts, they often argue that prevention is far cheaper than recovery, of course, right? Um, has Pakistan's budgeting approach shifted towards adaptation and resilience, or are we still spending, after disasters occur than before they happen?
The problem in Pakistan is कि ना the approach of government is reactionary rather than anticipatory. After something has happened, फिर जो है वो ख्याल आता है कि oh, we should have done that. We should have spent on the prevention because prevention is better than cure, right? And you see it across planning, not just in climate. You see it in health. You see it in other kind of disasters that happen in the country. तो वही है कि रिएक्शनरी अप्रोच है एंड द फोकस ऑफ पॉलिसी मेकर्स शुड जो एक्सपर्ट्स हैं क्लाइमेट के दे हैव continuously tried to shift government's response from reactionary to anticipatory action. I hope that the government uptakes their suggestions, but let's see. और फिर उसमें जो आपने प्रोविंसेस की बात की एंड देन दैट्स वेयर द मेन जिसको बोलते हैं ना कि एक खिचड़ी आपको नजर आती है कि ऑन टॉप यू हैव एनडीएमए, right? On top, you have Ministry of Climate Change. But after the 18th Amendment, climate and environment became a provincial subject, right? So the provinces have PDMAs, right? The Provincial Disaster Management Authorities. They have their own EPAs, Environment Protection Agencies. They have their own provincial climate authorities, right? उसमें फिर आप देखते कि few provinces then start lagging behind others, right? उसमें जो है फिर you have to appreciate that Punjab has done substantially more than other provinces. On few metrics उसमें compared to Sindh, compared to KP, KP has done a lot more with regards to afforestation, for example, right? कि जो billion tree tsunami जो थी उन्होंने start की and that became a project that this government has thankfully continued. Because usually what happens is when another government comes, they try to sidewind and wrap up the projects of the previous governments. तो उसमें ये बड़ा अच्छा है कि बेशक they changed the name and put a new packaging and wrapping on it. लेकिन the good thing is that they continued that project. अब आप देखिए कि जो सिंध का टोटल जो उनको बजट मिला था उस पे, तो वो उसकी जो यूटिलाइजेशन थी वो सिर्फ 10% रही. 10% of that budget that was given to Sindh. Punjab has integrated climate tagging as well. So Punjab has taken it seriously. But other provinces would need to, क्योंकि अब देखिए कि आप individually provinces वाइज नहीं कर सकते. अब देखिए कि बलूचिस्तान is a extremely water scarce province. It has a huge area, land mass of Pakistan. Uh, the lowest population, one of the lowest population in the entire provinces of Pakistan. But then it has not been able to, take and utilize the budget that it has been given on environment, on water related, building water resilience, climate resilience. It has not been able to utilize the funds that it has been given, just like Sindh.
Absolutely. I think let's hope for the best, and let's hope that this year the budget actually reflects that there is more spending on adaptation rather than mitigation, because unfortunately climate change has become our reality and there is no way around it. So we have to have a different approach this time. We have to prepare before the disaster strikes us. And this brings me to my, next question, which is about climate finance. I'd like to, sort of touch a little bit on that. Pakistan, continues to rely on international climate finance. I think you mentioned something in the beginning as well that, when we talk about climate change or when we talk about, climate finance, we often link it to international spending or international climate finance or external sources. So, how dependent do you think we are on external funding today? And what challenges does that create for long term climate planning and implementation?
I think the main challenge, अब देखिए कि the lifeline and life जो आप कह रहे हैं ना jugular vein of Pakistan is the Indus River, right? And within these rivers is where civilization starts, human civilization. आप देख लें Euphrates River that created the Mesopotamian civilization, the Nile River that created the Egyptian civilization, Indus की जो Indus Valley civilization, all these thousands of years old civilizations that started around rivers, right? Uh, in the case of these Euphrates and Nile, they are dependent on rain, right? The water that they carry in their banks are from monsoon. जो पाकिस्तान के साथ unfortunately केस हुआ इंडस का, the water in it comes from the glaciers of Himalayas and Hindu Kush, right? Because Pakistan is often called the third pole of the world. We've got 7,000 glaciers in Pakistan, right? अब वो जो मेल्ट होते हैं उसका पानी आता है that feeds into Indus. पाकिस्तान के साथ फिर अनफॉर्चुनेटली क्या हुआ कि पाकिस्तान का तो उसमें हाथ नहीं है कि जो राइजिंग ग्लोबल टेम्परेचर्स है, तो पाकिस्तान की बात तो ठीक है, ये जो डिमांड कह रहा है कि ट्रांस बाउंड्री हार्म जो हो रहा है हमें, कि वी रिक्वायर अराउंड 400 350 to 400 billion dollars for climate resilience, for energy transition. तो and the world does owe a responsibility because जो ग्लोबली टेम्परेचर्स राइज हो रहे हैं, तो उसमें पाकिस्तान की तो कंट्रीब्यूशन नेग्लिजिबल है। और उस टेम्परेचर राइज होने से जो पाकिस्तान के जो ग्लेशियर्स मेल्ट हो रहे हैं, दैट फीड द एंटायर कंट्री, राइट? बिकॉज जब ग्लेशियर्स मेल्ट होते हैं उसका पानी आता है, दैट फीड्स द एग्रीकल्चरल लैंड्स ऑफ पंजाब, ऑफ सिंध, ऑफ केपी, ऑफ बलूचिस्तान, from all the way up to Job and Harnai, सिंध में it goes all the way to the Indus Delta. उसमें आपके इतना मरीन इकोसिस्टम है, आपके मैंग्रोव्स हैं, आपके जो है वो it's like acting like a buffer that's stopping soil erosion of Sindh's coastline, राइट? तो ये एक बहुत ही जो है वो इंटरकनेक्टेड इकोसिस्टम है। अ, और जो टेम्परेचर्स जो इंसानों को मार रहा है वही आपके मरीन एनवायरनमेंट को भी मार रहा है, वही आपके जो वो एग्रीकल्चर को भी डिस्ट्रॉय कर रहा है। तो इंटरनेशनली तो पाकिस्तान का केस तो बड़ा जेन्युइन है कि वी नीड इंटरनेशनल फाइनेंसिंग। अराउंड $100 billion जो वो द गवर्नमेंट एस्टिमेटेड के जी वी नीड टू ट्रांजिशन फ्रॉम फॉसिल फ्यूल्स टू इलेक्ट्रिक and climate resilient resilience. To achieve climate resilience we need around 350 to 400 billion dollars, right? So but that hasn't been forthcoming, और फिर जो international जो assistance जो है वो reduce हुई है because of far right governments in Europe, in America, like
Right.
Trump's, and they, because the far right unfortunately thinks that climate change is a hoax, and they think of it as a woke subject, right? तो वो उसको that reflected that change, वो बोलते कि why should we subsidize climate projects in another country? We've got our own poor people to feed, we should focus on our own. why do हमने क्या, हमने तो दुनिया का ठेका नहीं उठाया हुआ। पहले सारा जो पोल्यूशन जो उनकी इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन से जो वो उन्होंने जो किया सारा एक्सप्लॉइटेशन ऑफ डिफरेंट कंट्रीज, राइट, ऑफ अफ्रीकाज रिसोर्सेज, ऑफ नराव की एक बड़ी जबरदस्त एग्जांपल है कि हाउ डू imperial powers owe a responsibility to developing nations, कि they extracted resources from Narau to the extent के उसके जो वो soil है, it's no longer sustainable to grow any kind of agriculture there. तो आप हाथ झाड़ के responsibility, they used resources from these countries just like Pakistan was a colony of these of Britain. They used resources from these countries to build wealth and climate resilient infrastructure in their own countries. And now when it's time to pay up for what they took and what the resources that they exploited, they've dusted their hands of all responsibility, and they say that why should we subsidize your transition, you are on your own, right? And it all then ties back to climate justice, जो इतना जो पाकिस्तान ने एक इंटरनेशनली वो उसको किया रेज, एंड देन पाकिस्तान rightly linked climate finance to climate justice. The real justice is that you pay for the damage that you've done. आप देखेंगे इट्स एन इंटरनेशनल प्रिंसिपल. बाहर आप अमेरिका में, यूके में, इफ समवन हिट्स योर कार, it damages your property, he has to pay.
Absolutely, yeah.
Rocket science, but their refusal, and then the climate finance that they are providing is not assistance or grant, it's loans. That's further, trapping Pakistan in a vicious debt cycle.
Absolutely. I think what you just mentioned shows us that, instead of relying on external funding, then we should do local capacity building, right? Because at a time like this, when, the whole world is facing a lot of fiscal pressures and, a war is also going on, of course, countries will continue to prioritize their own problems, instead of, aiding or helping out other countries. And the argument and the debate that we have about the global north and the global south, that will never stop, right? Because of course we were the victims of colonization. So of course we are till today, facing the repercussions of that. But how do you think we can reflect this then in our budget? How do you think we can increase local capacity building? And at a time of debt pressures and competing development needs, how can governments then justify greater investment in climate action?
आप देखिए कि whatever money that the government collects from taxes, almost 70% of that, 70% of the taxes that you collect go into debt servicing, right? आप पीछे पर डेवलपमेंट के लिए आपके पास, इसलिए फिर वो अब वो पहले जो है वो एसीसी और जो है वो इकोनॉमिक जो कोऑर्डिनेशन काउंसिल, दे प्रपोज्ड 1.2 ट्रिलियन रुपीस फॉर पीएसडीपी प्रोजेक्ट्स, राइट? उसमें तकरीबन 200 अरब रुपए की उन्होंने जो है वो कट लगाया उसको, बोलते कि नहीं, वी कैन नॉट अफोर्ड. पंजाब के बजट में बहुत ज्यादा कट लगा. सबसे बड़ा कट जो है वो अराउंड 50% पंजाब के डेवलपमेंट जो वो बजट था उसमें. फिर आप देखिए कि लोकल फाइनेंसिंग सबसे बड़ी तो एग्जांपल है कि एनर्जी ट्रांजिशन की, द सोलर रेवोल्यूशन दैट हैपेंड इन पाकिस्तान, दैट बिकेम एन इंटरनेशनल केस स्टडी.
Yeah,
Do you see how much Pakistan was celebrated? Everyone was shocked, from economists to think tanks जो international, कि how did Pakistan manage this energy revolution. ये तो हमारी जो बड़ी बड़ी जो वो economies है वो नहीं कर सकी इसको. Pakistan in such a short span was able to transition, so many households transitioned to solar without any kind of government intervention. So it was like a free market, right? Mm, Instead of promoting that momentum, instead of ensuring that that momentum grew, the government started to think of how we can impose taxes to you know throw a wrench and a spanner in that momentum, to bring it to a full stop, bring it to a halt. कि जी, अगर if everyone transitioned from the grid to solar panels, how will we pay IPPs? And just to quote, it won't be nice to name names, but the owner of an IPP very clearly said कि मुझे नहीं पता, जो the government owed that IPP 25% dollar linked जो उनका था, कि मुझे नहीं पता, बेशक पैसा छापना पड़े, इफ द गवर्नमेंट को पैसा छापना पड़े, बेशक एक्स्ट्रा पैसा छापे, स्टेट बैंक मुझे मेरे पैसे दें. एंड दैट पर्सन वाज अनफॉर्चुनेटली पाकिस्तानी.
yeah,
तो आप देखें कि एक इस तरह के विशियस डेट साइकिल में आप आ गए कि जो आपका जो है सर्कुलर डेट दैट बलून्ड टू ओवर 2.5 ट्रिलियन रुपीस.
mm,
Your entire budget of this year is 17 trillion rupees or something. उसमें से 2.5 ट्रिलियन, दैट जो मैं आपको बताया ना कि 17 ट्रिलियन वो है, उसमें क्योंकि डेफिसिट स्पेंडिंग होनी है, क्योंकि आप जो है वो डेट सर्विसिंग में इतना आपका पैसा चला जाता है. फिर आपने 1 ट्रिलियन रुपीस पीएसडीपी में रखने पर आपने प्रोविंसेस को देने, फेडरल के पास अपने पैसे ही पीछे नहीं बचते फॉर एनी काइंड ऑफ देन स्पेंडिंग दैट डज रिक्वायर कि जी लोकल स्पेंडिंग हम करें क्लाइमेट रेजिलियंस पे. फिर आपको अनफॉर्चुनेटली जो है फिर वो बाहर दूसरे मुल्कों की जो है ना, यू बिकम डिपेंडेंट ऑन इट. बिकॉज आप एक तो लोकल जो आपका एक मोमेंटम चल रहा होता है, एक लोगों ने इलेक्ट्रिक व्हीकल्स की तरफ ट्रांजिशन करना शुरू किया आफ्टर ग्लोबल प्राइसेस ऑफ ऑयल रोज, राइट? गवर्नमेंट इमीडिएटली अप्लाइड पेट्रोलियम लेवी, उसको डबल कर दिया, ट्रिपल कर दिया.
mm.
that didn't reflect the prices when they went down after things started settling between Iran and the US. तो उस वजह से फिर आप अगर लोकल फाइनेंसिंग की कोशिश भी करते हैं ना, तो फिर वो गवर्नमेंट की पॉलिसीज ऐसी होती है कि दैट काइंड ऑफ देन creates discord between people and the state.
Absolutely. I think, and when it comes to climate change, we want everyone to be on the same side, the government, the state, and the people, because collaboration is the key, when it comes to this issue. And if we want to actually uplift our people, and if we want to do local capacity building, the government has to play a role in that. And, our budget has to reflect um, that it is going to uplift people and it will invest in local capacity building, because that is the key. I think the new stance should be that, instead of being victims of climate change, we should empower ourselves and we should uplift ourselves, because we know that this problem is upon us. And now we have to, instead of asking other people for help, we should save ourselves instead. And let's hope that today, when the budget is revealed, there are parts of the budget that do reflect this. Just to, wrap up this conversation with you, Ahmed, I would like to ask you that, climate change has traditionally been treated as an environmental issue, but it is increasingly becoming an economic one and a fiscal issue, like you mentioned in our conversation.
As well as justice one as well.
Of course, and it will always be a justice issue. As Pakistan looks ahead, what would a truly climate resilient budget look like? And if the government could prioritize just 3 climate investments over the next 5 years, what could they be?
I think empowering local governments,
Yeah.
that would solve a lot of challenges. What happens when you centralize so much decision making and planning is that एक फिर disparity or a gap आ जाता है कि what people require on ground and what people sitting in offices in Islamabad think the people on ground in Balochistan or in Sindh districts of Khairpur or Job or Harnagi or Haran, Chaghi require. Right? एक बहुत बड़ा डिस्कनेक्ट है. तो जब तक ऑन ग्राउंड तो वो उनको जाने का शौक नहीं होता, फिर एक सिक्योरिटी रिस्क इज व्हाट दे कोट के जी दे आर फार फ्लंग एरियाज एंड ट्रैवल का इशू है फलान ढंग का. तो ठीक है, पर यू एम्पावर लोकल गवर्नमेंट्स दे, you trust your own people to make decisions for themselves, right? Because these are the people who are at the front line of the uh, most of the disasters that are happening in the country, right? Be it heat waves, be it flooding from Glove Glacier Lake outburst, जो होते हैं, early warning system. Then the private sector can play a really crucial role, like uh, Jazz's CEO Amir Ibrahim. Met him, so he was telling about an incredible project that Jazz is doing, कि जो उनके cell towers है, that are present everywhere, and that's an infrastructure that's already been built and paid for, right? Instead of the government scratch से लगाएं जो है early warning system के towers, why not piggyback on the existing infrastructure of this private sector, right? And they pitched it to the government. Government didn't show that much interest, and they took it on their own. उन्होंने एक initiative लिया, उन्होंने खुद initiative लिया कि जो हमारे जितने भी ये towers हैं, all the जो cellular companies, okay, we'll shift it from fossil fuels to solar panels. So that was another incredible initiative. उसी तरह आप देखिए कि क्रॉप्स जो आपकी वो है एक एग्रीकल्चरल, उसमें जो द यूज ऑफ केमिकल्स दैट आर लिंक्ड टू कैंसर कॉजिंग glyphosate and before that DDT that caused enormous harm to people's health. So WWF and Sapphire Mills, they started a project together to create a natural pest repellent and weed killer, right? So these are indigenous solutions, and building on top of that, there is a lot of indigenous knowledge that is present in Pakistan. ऐसा तो नहीं है ना कि आप जब वो 70 साल पहले जो आप अचानक जो इस एरिया में आके जब वो नमूदार हो गए, you have a history of 5,000, 9,000 years in this region from Mehergarh all the way to Lahore. तो indigenous knowledge आप देखिए कि अब आपको पता चलता है कि जी द cookware, it's Teflon coated and it's harmful PFAs जो उसके अंदर है, that's harmful to health. आपके before this we had food that was cooked in जो है वो मिट्टी के जो बर्तन होते हैं पिचर्स, जो आपके अभी प्लास्टिक के उसमें बोतलों में आता है पानी नेस्ले का आपके घर में, क्योंकि जो वो यूनिसेफ की एक रिपोर्ट अभी लॉन्च हुई 3 महीने पहले, इट मेंशनड वाटर स्कार्सिटी तो एक इशू है ना, तो जो पानी आ रहा है आपके नलकों में जो आपके घरों में, दैट्स पॉइजनड. जो आपके फिल्ट्रेशन प्लांट्स में पानी आ रहा है, दैट्स फुल ऑफ लेड, दैट्स फुल ऑफ आर्सेनिक, दैट्स फुल ऑफ हेवी मेटल्स. And when children are drinking that water, the people, adults that are drinking that water, lead cannot be processed by your body. It gets stored in your lungs, in your kidneys, in your brain, and that's causing developmental issues. Lead is directly linked to an increase in crime as well. देखिए कि ऑल ऑफ दिस इज इंटरलिंक्ड कि जी एक तरफ वाटर स्कार्सिटी है, फिर जो पानी आ रहा है वही आपकी इंडस्ट्री है, दे आर डंपिंग देयर वेस्ट विदाउट ट्रीटिंग इट. आपने रिवर इंडस को जो है वो डस्टबिन की तरह इस्तेमाल करा है आपकी इंडस्ट्रीज. तो आप जब क्लाइमेट की बात करते हैं, आप जब इकोलॉजी की बात करते हैं, आप बायोडाइवर्सिटी की बात करते हैं, फिर उसमें फिर सब जो ब्लेम गवर्नमेंट का नहीं है, पर लोगों का भी है कि आप जो वो केपी में दरख्त काट रहे टिम्बर माफिया, और जो कोई पूछने वाला नहीं है.
Absolutely. I think that in the coming year, we know that collaboration is the key between the state, between the citizens, and between the governments. And I hope that this year's budget reflects that. I hope that, we focus on our problems truly. And I hope we realize that, like you mentioned, that climate change is first a justice issue because people who actually have the least amount of contribution to it get impacted the most. And we can see that in those communities who actually have the least amount of impact, they're getting impacted the most when it comes to climate change. So I hope justice is served. And I hope that this year is a better year for Pakistan when it comes to climate change. Thank you so much, Ahmed, for joining us. It's a conversation that couldn't be more timely as Pakistan begins to assess whether today's budget is truly preparing the country for the climate challenges ahead. Thank you. As we've discussed today, climate budgeting is no simply about allocating money to environmental projects. It is about deciding how Pakistan prepares for a future that will be shaped by rising temperatures, water scarcity, extreme weather events, and growing economic risks and issues. With the federal budget now before us, the real measure of success will not be how much money is labeled as climate spending, but whether these investments actually reduce risk, strengthen resilience, and protect the communities most vulnerable to climate change. Thank you for watching Front Seat to Climate Change. See you next time.